Curious George goes to the hospital. H.A. Ray. This is George. He lived with his friend, the man with the yellow hat. He was a good little monkey, but he was always curious. Today, George was curious about a big box on the man's desk. What could be in it? George could not rest. His slim had to open it. It was full of funny little pieces of all sorts of shape and all sorts of color. George took one out. It looked like a piece of candy. Maybe it was candy. Maybe he could eat it. George put the piece in his mouth, and before he knew, he had swallowed it. A while later, the man with the yellow hat came home. "Why, George," he said, "I see you have already opened the box with the jigsaw puzzle. It was supposed to be a surprise for you. Well, let's go to work on it." Suddenly, the piece was finished. Well, almost finished. One piece was missing. The man looked for it everywhere, but he could not find it. "That's strange," he said. "It's a brand new puzzle." "Well, it cannot be helped. Maybe we'll find it in the morning. Let's go to bed now, George." The next morning, George did not feel well. He had a tummy ache and did not want to eat his breakfast. The man was worried. He went to the telephone and called Dr. Banker. "I'll be over as soon as I can," said the doctor. First, Dr. Baker looked down George's throat and felt his tummy. Then he took out his stethoscope and listened. "I'm not sure what's wrong," he said. "You better take George to the hospital and have an X-ray taken. I'll call them and let them know you are coming." "Don't worry, George," said the man as they were driving to the hospital. "You have been there before. When you broke your leg, remember how nice the doctor and nurse were?" George held his big rubber ball tight as they walked up to the hospital step. The nurse took them down a long hallway to a room where she gave George something to drink that took a while to taste sweet. "It is called barium," the nurse explained. "It helped the doctors find out what is wrong with you, George." In the next room stood a big table, and the doctor was just putting it on a heavy apron. Then he gave the man one just like it. George was curious. Could he get one too? No, he did not. "You get on that table, George," the doctor said. "I'm going to take some X-ray pictures of yours inside." He pushed the button, and there was a funny noise. "Now you may get up, and you will have at the X-rays. They looked right away. Now let's see. There is something there that could not be, said the doctor. When they were looking at the X-ray, why, that looks like... I think that must be the piece of what's missing in our jigsaw puzzle yesterday, said the man. Well, said the doctor. At least we know now what is wrong with our little patient. I'll tell Dr. Baker right away. George will have to stay at the hospital for a few days. They'll put a tube down his throat to get the piece out. It's only a small operation. I'll call the nurse and have her take you to the emergency office. Many people were waiting outside the office. George had to wait too. Look, Beatrice, the woman next to him, said to her little girl. There is curious George. Bessie looked up for a moment, but she did not even smile. Bessie had never been to a hospital before. She was scared. Finally, it was George's turn. A pretty young nurse took him to the next room. My, how many rooms and how many nurses there were. One nurse wrote down a lot of things about George, his name and his orders and what was wrong with him. Another nurse put a necklace around his waist. It has your name on it, George, she said. So that's very, everybody knows who you are. Then the pretty young nurse came back. My name is Carol, she said. I'm going to take you to our room now. We can call it the children's ward and put you to bed, where you'll be lots of children to keep you companion. And so it was. There were lots of children in the room. Some were up and around, others were in the bed, with a doctor or a nurse looking after them. Dave was having a blood transfusion. Steve had his leg bandaged and was sitting in a go-kart. Bessie was in bed looking sad. George got the bed next to Bessie. George was glad when he was in his bed at last. His tummy was hurting again. The man stayed with him for a while. Now I have to leave you, George, he firmly said. I'll be back first thing in the morning before they take you to the operating room. Nurse Coral will tuck you in when it's time to sleep. Then he left. George was sat there and cried. As he had promised, the man was back early next morning. The nurses were keeping George very busy. One nurse was taking him temperature, one was taking him blood pressure, one was giving him a pill to make you sleepy, George, she said, and one was getting ready to give him a shot. It's going to hurt, George, she said, but only for a moment. She took his arm, and George let out to scream, but the needle wasn't touched you yet, said the nurse, laughing. We're there now. It's done. That wasn't so bad, wasn't it? No, it really was not. And anywhere, it was over now. By the time the attendant came to the screener to wheel him to the operating room, George was getting sleepy. He tried hard to stay awake. He was curious to see what would happen next. He could see a big table with a bright lamps over it and the doctor and nurse all around. They had caps on their hands and masks over their faces. Only their eyes were showing. One of the doctors winked at George and patted his head. It was Dr. Baker, who had been to the house when it all had started. He looked funny with his mask on, and then George was fast asleep. When George woke up, he did not know what happened. He did not even know where he was. Then he saw Nurse Coral. It's all done, George, she said. They got the piece out. In a day or two, you will be running around again. The man had brought him a picture book. But George felt sick and dizzy. His throat was hurting, too. He was not even curious about the new book. He closed his eyes again. Well, let him sleep, said Nurse Coral. The more he slept, the better. The next morning, George felt better. He even ate the dishes of ice cream. Miss Baker came to see him, and the man, of course, came too. Bessie was watching him from time to time. She seemed a little less sad, but she still did not smile. Steve wheeled his scorecard over to George's bed. Tomorrow, I can get up and try to work, he said. Boy, I can hardly wait. I'll take you to the playroom now, George, Nurse Coral said to the next morning. And in the afternoon, your friend will come to take you home. The playroom was full of children. A lady was showing Busty now how to use finger paints. There were all sorts of things to play with, even a puppet theater, and that was just the thing for George. He had 4 hands, so could handle 4 puppets at the same time. George gave a real puppet show with a dragon and a clown and a bear and a policeman. The children laughed and shouted, and even Busty for the first time smiling at a little. There was a TV in the playroom, and also the record players. George was curious if he climbed on a recorder player and turned the switch. Would it go around and round like the real merry-go-round? It did! It started slowly, then it went faster and faster, and whoopee! George had lost his balance and was sailing through the air. George landed on a soft cushion. The children cheered, and Busy smiled again. George was so funny. But then the play lady picked George up. That's enough for now, she said. You better take a nap before lunch. We have a big day ahead of us. The mayor is coming to visit the hospital today, and later on you will be going home, George. When George woke up, Steve was just taking his first step. The nurse was helping him, and the children were watching. The go-kart was standing there, empty. George was curious. He looked at it, then he climbed on it. He grabbed the wheels and then, while nobody was looking, he wheeled the go-kart right up the room. George could make a go-kart go very fast. This was fun. Down the hall he went. By now the nurse had noticed that he was gone and come running after him. George! She shouted. George was too excited to listen. The wheel wheeled around the corner and down the ramp to the floor below, where some men were busy pushing the launch cart, and a lot of doctors and nurses were showing the Maya around. George tried to stop, but it was too late. Wham! The go-kart loaded right in the middle of everything. The launch cart tumbled, span itch, and scrambled eggs and strawberry jam were all over the floor. People fell over each other, and George was thrown out of the go-kart and landed right in the Maya's arm. The mess it was! You broke all my dishes, someone cried. He ran to the go-kart, complained another. What will the mother think of it? Whispered someone else, and so it went. Suddenly everyone looked up and listened. From above came happy laughter, and they were stood busy, laughing. Then the children joined in. Then the mother started laughing. The family everybody just laughed and laughed. Everybody was it and escaped George. Misty came running down the ramp and threw her arms around George and kissed him. Don't be sad, George, he said. The whole thing was so funny. I've never laughed so much in my life. I am so glad you were in the hospital with me. Now the director of the hospital spoke. I am sorry this happened, Mr. Moya, he said, but I think we'll just clean up the mess and be done with it. George, he went on it. You've made a terrible mess, but you also made our sad little Gusty happy again, and that is more than any of us has done. And now I see your friend has just come to take you home. So goodbye, George, and take good care of yourself. Children crowded around windows waving goodbye when George and the man with the yellow hat were finally leaving the hospital. As the car was driving into the driveway, Nurse Carol came running after them. Here's a little pack with something that belongs to you, George, she called. But don't open it before you're home. George was curious. Well, who should not be? The moment he reached home, he ripped a paper off, tore open the box, and there was the piece of the puzzle that had caused all the trouble. How nice of the doctor to save it for us, the man said with the yellow hat. And now we can finish the puzzle. The end. Listening the story with me. I hope you like it and see you next time. Bye bye. What if you are George and you made lots of troubles? What would you say to the lawyer? And if you are in the hospital, you will, like George, this careers playing in the hospital? And see you next time. Bye bye.